And coming to you live from the fringes of University of Ghana is Lecture Hour on Radio Universe 105.7 with me, Hayford Yɛboah. A very good afternoon to you, wherever you are. The land is good, the land is fine. It is a pleasure to be with you on the show. Mama Africa, we cry for thee. So what do I have on the table for you this particular afternoon? We want to look at something on history. Africa has been described by scholars as the origin of civilization. By that, it means that technology, medicine, education, engineering, and whatnot began here in Africa. If this claim is anything to go by, how do we go a begging for the very things that we started here in Africa? Why have we lagged behind in terms of development? Is it a mere romanticization of our history? These are more coming up in a jiffy. And my guest in the studio is Dr. Obadele Kambon, a Pan-African activist, a research fellow at the Institute of African Studies here at the University of Ghana. And he's here to do justice to the injustice. So why have we lagged behind in terms of development? If we are the very people who started all these forms of trade, shades of trades in our part of the world. Also at Twitter, my handle at Hayford4GH. So let's set the ball rolling. So as routinely done on my show, we will have to go in for a short speech and then come back in-house to have our discussion with our guests. And we're going to have to listen to a speech by Joseph Alfredo Antonio Ben Jokanan, referred to by his admirers as Dr. Ben, yes. He was an African-American writer and a historian. He was considered to be one of the more prominent Afrocentric scholars. He was born in the year 1918, 31st December, at Gondar, Ethiopia. He passed on in the year 2015, last year, 19th March, in the Bronx, in New York City, New York, United States of America. He had his education at the University of Havana. He's a great scholar indeed. He wrote lots of books, including Black Man of the Nile and His Family. That was in 1972. African Origins of the Major Western Religions in 1970. Africa, Mother of Western Civilization, 1971. A Chronology of the Bible, 1995. We the Black Jews, 1983. And we have a lot more. We cannot mention all of them today. So we go in for our speech by Dr. Ben Jokanan, and he tries to look at what, as a people, what our history has been, and consistently appears to be fading off because the truth is not being told. Let's take a listen to this speech by Dr. Jokanan.
I would like to first express my appreciation for your invitation. It took me 50 years to get to Tuskegee. 50 years ago, at age 16, I applied for entrance to Tuskegee. My application was accepted, but the immigration laws of the United States of America were such, and I don't think they have changed much, that I couldn't get here. I remembered that such had happened to a man before me by the name of Marcus Messiah Garvey. He was invited by Booker T. Washington. I don't know if you know about him. I heard you don't have a Booker T. Washington Day. Unusual. But anyhow, probably better thoughts may come about and there will be a Booker T. Washington Day at Tuskegee. But anyhow, Marcus Messiah Garvey was invited by Booker T. Washington to come to the United States. The facts are that red tapes in the immigration department, Garvey arrived 6 months subsequent to the death of the great Booker T. Washington. So taking 50 years to get here, nevertheless I got here. I do not know if I would have taken the course of action in my life that I have now taken. However, I was lucky enough to slip through an engineering course and graduate in a few more courses, and here I am. Within the context of my education, if you could call it that, I would prefer to call it the course of my indoctrination, my training, which started in Ethiopia, East Africa, and continued in Brazil, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the United States Virgin Islands, England, and Spain. Been around a few places. And in all of these places that I've been, I never once received an education in the history of African people. Yet I thought that I've educated myself down through those period of time. And it is because of that self-education in those things which meant most to me as an African person that I decided at no time would I stand still in these halls of indoctrination and not rebel with the necessary documentation of the lies that are being taught in these halls. And so I may be saying things that may hurt many of you, if not most of you, because some of the lies have become your dear frame of reference. We could start with the Greeks. I hope you of fraternities and sororities don't get too bothered about it, since the Greeks weren't too much anyhow. But we can start with that, because there is where our institutions of learning has decided to start civilization. Yet the Greeks are only here from at least 1000 before the Common Era, or before the Christian era, as you would prefer to say. Let us just, for example, cite one. And that particular person would be Hippocrates. And I'm sure that you heard of Hippocrates. And when you consider that Hippocrates wasn't born until 333 BC, or before the Common Era, yet in your education you were told that Hippocrates is the father of medicine. That's a lie. There's no way that I can say about it other than it's a lie. A lie is a lie, whether it's in the university or in the church. How could Hippocrates be the father of medicine when the first time you see him, he is in Egypt learning medicine from Africans? There are numerous papyri, medical papyri on medicine. The nearest to Hippocrates is at least 1300 years before he was born. For example, we have what is known as the Hetus papyrus, the Ebers papyrus, and now the so-called Rockefeller papyrus, the Edwin C. Smith papyrus. All of these papyri go back to as early as 3100 BC. The man who Hippocrates took an oath that he would practice medicine according to this man, this African, whom the Greeks call Aesculapius in the Hippocratic Oath, a man by the name of Imhotep, died. He practiced medicine and died 2,500 years before the birth of Hippocrates. And you are telling me that the medical school and the pre-medical historians don't know this? They don't know it because, unfortunately, Imhotep had a high visibility like myself, otherwise called black. They don't know that the Ebers papyrus by Hatshepsut, dealing with Planned Parenthood, I said Planned Parenthood, 1550 years before the birth of Jesus the Christ, is out there, when every medical journal in 1961 published copies of the Ebers papyrus. And we could go on with the papyri with respect to all kinds of diseases that the Africans had produced, both in Egypt and Ethiopia and Sudan, and a place then called Puanit, now called Somalia. But that would be satisfactory. But let us take the kind of education that we do have. We are in a chapel, and we have been told about an immaculate conception and virgin birth. We have been told about the beginning of the world with Adam and Eve. We have been told about a man by the name of Cain who slew his brother Abel. And we've been told that all of these things only happen once. And they go back to the Old Testament, or otherwise called the Torah, or the Pentateuch, or the Chumash. Those are names for what you call the Old Testament. But we have never been told that they are only copies of stories that predated them by thousands of years. Let's read them one by one. I heard some hymns and everything already. Oh yes, you have been told a lot of lies. No other way to talk about it. And those who teach them, if in fact they did any research, must know they are lies. That is providing that they have never gone to Egypt or to Ethiopia or to Sudan to see the living proof. The writings on the tombs, the writings in the pyramids, what is called the pyramid text and the coffin text. That is providing that they have not seen the holy scriptures of the Africans of the Nile Valley, otherwise called the Egyptian Book of the Dead, or as Budge called it in his translation of the hieratic writing, or the Egyptian Book of the Coming Forth by Day and by Night. In the temple of Setai-1, for example, at a place called Abydos, not only is there the writings of an immaculate conception 4,000 years before the story of Mary, but it is there in picture form. Are we to say that the theologians of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have never once taken a trip to Egypt, from whence these things were taken? In that same temple, you see a story of how Set-Typhon murdered his brother Osiris 2,000 years before the Jewish story of Cain and Abel. And we are told that an African from Egypt by the name of Moses, born in the city of Goshen, that's still Egypt. Egypt is in Africa, by the way. The last time I saw it in January. You heard of a place called Middle East. I don't know of any place called Middle East. That's political jingoism. But we can find that there was no Moses on Mount Horeb in the Sinai to receive any 10 commandments that had not been given before or written before in Egypt, because you could go in the book of the Coming Forth by Day and by Night, the Book of the Dead, and see in what is called the Osirian drama, not only those 10, but 32 more, a total of 42, which you can also go in the temple of Ramesses VI, in the Valley of the Kings, across what is today called Luxor. And in that tomb, you would see the 42 listed commandments, or otherwise negative confession, 2,000 years before the birth of Moses. But they told you that Moses was taught. He was an Egyptian, taught in school in Egypt, and became a priest in the system. Could you have been born in the United States of America, went to kindergarten, then elementary school, junior high school, and never heard of the United States Constitution? It was equally impossible for Moses to have born in Egypt, go to school in Egypt, study an Egyptian system, worship God Amun-Ra, and never once heard of the 42 negative confession, which have in it, thou shalt not kill. I have not killed man nor woman. I have not made like thy bushel. I have not. Moses himself is charged with murder. His brother Aaron is charged with theft. 40 years before they reached Mount Sinai, then somebody had a law against theft and against murder before he reached Mount Sinai. Where did they get it? But you weren't taught anything about this. All of this information have been suppressed at a place called the Council of Jamia and the Council of Nicene in 325 AD, when Constantine, the Roman emperor, conquered North Africa, took over the role of the Christian church, which started in Alexandria with Pantheus and Boethius, not in Rome. But this too you have not been taught. You have not been taught that the three people who died first in the name of Jesus the Christ were three African women: Felicita, Nymphano, and Perpetua. Yet you know everything. You're born again. You know it all. You can't be blamed for it. Even your teachers may not be able to be blamed for this, because one can't teach what one doesn't know, or one have not learned, or one have not experienced, because there is no interest for people to go to Egypt to see anything but to go to the Holy Land. And that's why Jesse is tied and had to get on his knees and pray and beg forgiveness. He was scared he wouldn't be able to get back in the Holy Land for saying what was right. But there's more than that. Because you have been told that unless Europeans teach you, you haven't been taught. But who told you that the first university built in all of Europe was built by Africans called Moors? At the university, what is called the University of Salamanca in Spain. Check it out. Europe's first university. Not only the stones were put together like the stones in most of the building and the bricks in most of the building here. I'm not talking about that aspect of only the building. I'm talking about the educational system is nothing but a copy of the University of Djenne, D-J-E-N-N-E, of ancient Ghana, which was burnt down and rebuilt as the University of Sankore in the city of Tumbat, which the French later called Timbuktu. Then carried, as the Africans called Moors, conquered Iberia, now Spain and Portugal and southern France, and established in there the university system. And as I said before, it was not the first. The earliest of the Greeks were trained in a place called the subordinate lodge of Croton and Delphi. Subordinate lodges of the Grand Lodge in a place called Waset, which the Greeks later changed to Thebes or Thebes. The current Arabs changed it to Luxor. But did you get that in Greek philosophy? Did you get it in Greek history or European history? None whatsoever. And how did you get Hannibal Barca and his father Hasdrubal Barca and his brother and his father, rather, Hamilcar, his brother Hasdrubal? How did you receive it in the educational system? How did the textbook show it? It showed it as they were not Africans. What they said is some Phoenicians came from Phoenicia, and Carthage, which they later called Carthage, was in fact a Phoenician country. 80 people came from Phoenicia with a woman named Elisa, which Virgil called Dido or Dido in his little play about it. And those 80 changed all the Africans into Phoenicians. And thus we are taught that the Africans of Carthage were in fact Caucasians. It's all right when they taught me in school in Puerto Rico, I didn't know any difference. I was born in Ethiopia, grew up in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, and Cuba and Brazil. So when they were teaching me that at the University of Puerto Rico, I knew no different, and so it went down all right. But I accidentally went to Morocco, accidentally, and find that what I had been taught in school was nothing but a pack of lies. Because I then went into the temple, I then went into the museum and found that it was totally different. But then I went on to Italy, in the Medici Museum, the Museum of Alessandro de' Medici, only to find that Alessandro was an African born in Italy. And no one had told me up to then that there were Roman emperors from Africa, such as Honorius and Septimus Severus and his son Caracalla. No one had taken time to explain to me anything about the Greeks coming to Egypt and to Nubia and to Ethiopia, depending on who they were, to receive their earliest education, those who had not gone to a little colony, a little enclave in what was then called Lebus, now called Libya, to receive their first glimpse into education taught by Africans. Well, having gone the route of civil engineering and with a bachelor's and then master's in architectural engineering, you would think that I should be satisfied at that point. But I couldn't be satisfied because the fire had burnt. You see, I was the admirer of two particular people at that time. One called Booker T. Washington and one called Marcus Garvey. In the reverse, Garvey first and then Washington. Garvey because in my household, Garvey was the word next to the deity. And the relationship between Garvey and Booker T had become so close that I too followed the teachings and philosophical concept of the late Honorable Booker T. Washington. But within that philosophy was something else both men always taught: the integrity of the individual. And the integrity of the individual refused, in my case, to accept lies, such as Benny Goodman is the king of swing, and Duke Ellington must have been the emperor of swing. Chick Webb, having taught Gene Krupa, I was told that Gene Krupa is the best on the drum, but he went to Chick Webb to get to be the best on the drum. I don't know if you know Chick Webb, you know Ella Fitzgerald. That's Chick taught her. I just throw that in to show you that the lie doesn't stop in ancient time. It continues up.
My name is Michael Okpayemi Ige.
As truth. And so in my further examination, I was dealing with 3.14. All of you here in engineering knows what it's supposed to symbolize. They say it's pi. And I was taught that it came from the Greeks. And you know, I believed it. What else could I do? The teacher told me.
That was the voice of a fiery speaker in the person of Dr. Ben Jokanan. Yes, on the title, Black Man Wake Up, Black Man Wake Up, Black Man Wake Up. So the preamble, to our topic for the day looks at the fact that Africa has gained, if you like, the fame of being the originator of all shades of trades, the originator of all disciplines, academic disciplines and whatnot. Yet we still face the challenges that we have. We are not able to turn things around because we seem to be fumbling with the ideas, if you like, the knowledge to turn things around. Now, my guest in the studio, in the person of Dr. Obadeli Kambon, will help us to unpack the issues Stay tuned.
United Nations Youth Ambassador and Executive Director of the Concerned Africans Youth Forum. I like listening to lecture hour with Hayford Yɛboah because it's a stimulating time. It's a mind-blowing program. You can't afford to miss this. Thank you very much. My name is Michael Okpayemi, United Nations Youth Ambassador and Executive Director of the Concerned Africans Youth Forum. I like listening to lecture hour with Hayford Yɛboah because it's a stimulating time. It's a mind-blowing program. You can't afford to miss this. Thank you very much.
Yes. So the question is, if you have all these, sheets of knowledge and traits of, if you like, sheets of knowledge, and then the ideas that have helped others to also thrive as a people, why have we lagged behind in terms of development? Is it a mere romanticization of our history? You can keep your comment coming in via WhatsApp 0244-199803, 0244-199803, or on Facebook, that is Lecture Hour 105.7. You can also tweet at me at the Twitter handle at Hayford4GH. Hayford4GH. At 2:45, you would also the phone line will be open for you to put in your comment, if you like, to the effect of that. That is the topic that we intend to discuss here this afternoon. And so the number to do so is 0262512963, 0262512963, right here on Radio Universe 105.7. So let me introduce my guest properly. Welcome, Dr. Obadele Kambon.
Thank you very much, Brother Hayford. How are you?
I'm fine. How about you two?
I'm doing quite well.
Thank you. Yes, you know one Jiwonu?
Yes, I do.
He sends his greetings to you.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, so, Doc, what I do know about, Africans is the fact that in the past a little over a century, they are governing themselves. They have self-governance, self-rule, have had independence, and all that. Why this topic, Black Man Wake Up? Can you walk us through this mantra or phrase, Black Man Wake Up?
Okay. Very good. Now, just on the first point of Africans have had self-rule over the past century, our former president, Kwame Nkrumah, had a book entitled Neo-Colonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, where he basically deals with the period that we're in right now, which is a period of neo-colonialism. So even in terms of the coup that deposed Kwame Nkrumah...
I understand, Doc, that you were off air.
Okay.
So I think we need to
start
that again. Yes, okay. So welcome once again to the studio of Radio Universe 105.7. Doc.
All right, no problem. Yeah, as I was saying, you had mentioned briefly that we've had self-government over the past half century, depending on the country. And there's a book entitled Neo-Colonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism by our first president, Kwame Nkrumah, where he basically talks about the situation that we're in right now, where he was deposed in a coup that was masterminded by the CIA. You have so many others, such as Thomas Sankara. Some of our greatest leaders were either deposed in coups or assassinated, such as Patrice Lumumba.
Okay.
So there have been a lot of outside machinations. So just so that we can have the same background and basis, that we really have not had a chance to govern ourselves without the external machinations of those who colonized us. And really, in this neo-colonial state that we're in, we are yet to have what I would say would be a true education system that helps us understand who we are, self-knowledge, and then also who our enemies are. So what we have in its place, we have a system of miseducation in many ways, diseducation and anti-education, that's one. But to come to the core of the matter, we're talking about development. And there's an issue just in terms of what we would define and understand development as being. I think you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. Yes, when we say Pan-Africanism, what does it mean?
Okay, this is very good. You have two major ideas about what Pan-Africanism can, should, or would mean. One is such that it incorporates anyone who happens to be on the African continent, whether they are invaders, whether they are indigenous or not. So the very first imperialists and colonizers, the Arabs, in terms of those who have stayed on for long term, they would be included in that type of definition. The Dutch Boers in South Africa, those who were in Zimbabwe, so forth and so on. That's one definition. Now another definition sees it as all. It sees one, Africa and Africans and black as being synonyms. So that would be Africans, black people, no matter where we are on the planet, are Africans. And Pan-Africanism would be the unification of those black people, those African people, under one umbrella, usually referring to political, economic, so forth and so on. So for me, I ascribe to that second one, that idea of black people throughout the global African world that sees black and Africans as synonyms. And basically from the idea, Malcolm X used to say, if a cat has kittens in an oven, that doesn't make them biscuits. By the same token, Africans anywhere else in the world are still Africans, are still black people.
Can we have an African who is more of, the opposite, or that is the European mindedness?
I would understand that as an anti-African, right? So basically what we would need is some type of evaluative criteria and organizing principles to define what is an African versus someone who is an anti-African. And not only a person, anything that perhaps comes across our path, we should be able to evaluate it in some type of objective terms. So we can say, okay, this thing that's in front of us now, does it originate from African people? Does it benefit African people? And then once we come with those questions, we would say, okay, well, in what areas, right? Okay. Does it benefit African people economically? This thing that I'm wearing right now, right? Did it originate? Did this style of clothing, this style of dress originate from African people? If I can answer that affirmatively, then I would say, okay, well, that's one. Does it benefit African people? If so, in what area? Okay, economically, I have to purchase it from African people. Okay. Two, psychologically, I know I'm not depending on my past, current, and future enemies in order to clothe myself, and so forth and so on. So again, evaluative criteria and organizing principles can help us weed out what is African versus what is anti-African, and then look at things on a gradient, right? So this would perhaps be the most African, to continue with this analogy of clothing. We could say, all right, if the cotton is grown in Burkina Faso, the women spin the thread, there the men weave it together and then sew the strips together, and then the dyeing is done by indigenous plants and all those things. Okay. You could say in terms of origination and benefit, that is extremely high. And then much lower, you could say, okay, well, wax print. Then you can even ask, well, is it GTP and Wooden, which has been sold to Vlisco, or is it Printex? Is it something that is still owned indigenously? So anything we can look at it as a gradient, going down to less and less and less African, more and more and more African in terms of origination and benefit.
So those are the standards by which we can identify who a Pan-Africanist is.
Yes, I would say so.
Okay. In the context of the current form of education that Africans are generally getting, most often, times, African historians describe that as indoctrination. You heard yes. Dr. Ben Jokanan saying that. First of all, what is indoctrination, and what have been the plans to provide unadulterated form of education to the African?
Yes, I would concur with Dr. Ben that at this point we don't have a system of education on the continent. You may have one or two who are, making efforts towards that, but in terms of a system, we don't have that. One of my students at AUCC, she did a documentary called Unsung Legacy for Behind the Scenes. And in that, she came to the University of Ghana campus and she asked on the, I asked her class when she was taking it with me, and I asked the classes here, I would just go through a list, and I would say, okay, have you ever heard of Napoleon Bonaparte? All of them nod, yes, of course, ha ha ha, of course I know. You say, oh, have you heard of Shakespeare? Oh, of course, ha ha. Have you heard of Einstein? Yes, of course. But then you start to get to the African names. Have you heard of Imhotep?
Nope.
Say, what is that? Did you sneeze? Or bless you, right? They don't even know what you're talking about. Hatshepsut, no, they don't know. Queen Nzinga, they don't know. Amani Rinas, they don't know. So basically, there's a book called Too Much Schooling, Too Little Education, which basically describes this thing where we don't know anything about ourselves, right? And a major aspect of what we would do for ourselves is precedent. So precedent says, okay, I've done this before, therefore I can do it again. And there's a quote that historian Runoko Rashidi likes to use. He says, what we do for ourselves depends on what we think of ourselves. What we think of ourselves depends on what we know of ourselves. And what we know of ourselves depends on what we have been told.
Let me, take this opportunity to do this announcement. Yes, if you just tuned in, you're listening to Lecture Hour, your most authoritative and intellectual show, research analysis show in Ghana, with me, Hayford, and we're trying to look at an issue titled "Black Man Wake Up." Black Man Wake Up. And my guest in the studio is Dr. Obadile Kambon, and he is unpacking, what it means when we say "Black Man Wake Up." He's unpacking with me now. The phone line is open. You can call in and make your contribution, asking questions that you think you are not clear with, and also keep sending in your text messages. I will also read them out loud here on 105.7, and so keep listening. Doc, let us look at these perception. Your onlookers, if you like, critics of Pan-Africanism claim your resolve for the African, the so-called black man wake up is a cliche, has no traction. It's an overused expression. What is your reaction to that?
Well, this is what I would say is actually a result of not having an education system. So you have people who would say things that are just coming from that. And I'll give you an analogy, right? And just in terms of proper orientation, it would be like, here we have the swimming pool at University of Ghana. Let's say you jump off the diving board and you go into the pool. Now, let's say you get your orientation wrong and you think you're swimming up, but actually you're swimming to the bottom. You can see how that would be a serious problem because you are trying to get air, but you're going in the wrong direction. This is basically the situation in which we find ourselves. Now, you started off the program discussing all of the contributions that African people have made, and one of those contributions is what is called the Turin Papyrus Map. And this is the very first map in ancient history that was by the scribe Amen-Nacht. And in that papyrus, it has a south-up orientation. Now, when we say a south-up orientation, this means that south is at the top and north is at the bottom. Now, just in terms of any map that you see of Africa, you will see north at the top and south at the bottom. Now, this is significant because when we're saying that the south is on the top, in ancient Kemet, there were several things that led to that orientation. One is that we came from the south. Also, the word for east, Iabit, was also related to the word for left. So that means Somalia, Ethiopia, all of that is on your left as you're picturing the map. Also, Eminet, the word for west, was also the word for right. That means Senegal, Ghana, all of this in West Africa is on your right. The word for south was up. The word for north was down, right? Upper Kemet and lower Kemet. So basically what we've had done is our entire orientation in terms of what the world is. We're like someone in the pool and don't know which way is up to air and which way is going down towards death.
Okay.
So this is, basically in terms of our orientation, how many of us get this information? This is something that Dr. Ben continually reiterated in his speech. He says, where would you have gotten this information? You've never heard anything about yourself.
Thank
never
you.
seen a correct orientation.
Yes, we'll come back and then delve much into that. We have some questions coming in from our listeners, and we have one from Nima, that is from Geoffrey from Nima, and he is asking that he wants to know, looking at this era of our generation where our leader has become selfish, that is, it means our leaders of today, is there any possibility of African changing their mentality towards the good?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. One thing that we have to keep in mind is that anytime, it's sort of like a concept of natural selection versus artificial selection, and I want you to follow me on this. When we're talking about natural selection, we're talking about, basically this idea of survival of the fittest and that type of thing. Artificial selection is where someone else is doing the selecting for you. So as we mentioned, some of the leaders that we chose for ourselves, some of the most Pan-African, some of the most brilliant, that many of them were cut down. They were taken out through coups. And those who have been allowed to stay on for sometimes 20 years, 30 years, 40 years have been the puppets of the West. So, when we talk about Mobutu, right?
Yeah.
Those like that, Blaise Compaoré. So those are the artificial selection that someone from the outside is saying you will be allowed to stay in as long as you do our bidding. When we're choosing for ourselves, that will be natural selection. That would be those who are best, those who are brightest, those who are most intelligent are the ones who are our leaders. Until we get to a point where we are selecting our own leaders and not the charade of selecting our own leaders and those who just go along with IMF loans, World Bank loans, that those are not leaders. Those are, when we're talking about artificial selection, it's sort of like how you can breed dogs, right? They're not the ones who are selecting that the strongest will be the one to mate. It's someone who is making that decision for them, and that's basically the situation that we're in.
I hope Jeffrey's question has been well answered. Yes, there's another message coming in, and it says that this is really an amazing show. We are listening live at Pentecost University. We suggest that the time for the show is increased to 2 hours. I'm Brown from Spintex. I love this show, very educative, but it needs more time. Another one to here, and saying that is good show coming from Richard from Accra. Let me see what else. And another one coming in and say, Doctor, why has the African failed to live up to expectation? I'm sure you touched on that. Yeah. So, and it's coming from Kwame from Odoko.
Let me briefly bring in another issue. When we're talking about why has the African done this or not done that, first off, we have an issue where we are yet to truly become Africans in any type of sense that we were discussing before. That today, if I say, okay, whose food is fufu, you would say, okay, well, the Asantes.
Yeah.
If I say, whose food is Banku, you would say, oh, the Airways. Whose food is, Dokono or Kenke? Oh, that's the Gas. When you're African, you understand that that is an African food, therefore it is also my food. You understand? You say, who has a small, oh, that's what Northerners wear. In this day and age, we still are yet to understand that no matter where it is, if it's in Africa or if it's by African people, then this is our own thing. So what I would say is that we give lip service to being African, but in our day-to-day lives, we're still very much hinged on fragmentation, where we'll say, oh, don't let Twi be the national language because that's their language. Why can't you use my language? Whereas if we were African, we would say that's an African language, therefore that is also my language. And we would rather do something where we will say, let's all be under English as opposed to elevating one single African language because we can all rally behind that. So, when we're talking about African, these are some of the issues that we have to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you. Another message coming in from one Robert Afagachi, and it says that the declaration by Dr. Kwame Nkrumah that a black man is capable of managing his own affairs never materialized. It's still a dream. That's what he means.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
He is saying that because he doesn't know any history, right? And, in many of the schools, history has been taken out. If you don't know history, then you think certain things are hypothetical. When you do know, you can point to actual examples. I'll give you one. So Ramesses II, right? This was that what they call Ramesses the Great. He led an expedition into southwestern Asia to conquer Megiddo. Now, in doing this, they had a choice of 3 different roads. And one road, it was a direct road, and another one, it was an indirect road that led through a perilous pass where you had cliffs on either side, and any army could have decimated his entire army from taking that route. So the enemy said there's no way they would ever take that route, so they left it alone. So Ramesses said, this is the way that we're going to take. So he took his thousands and thousands and thousands of soldiers through this pass, and then they came around and they were able to overwhelm. Even after being ambushed, they were able to overwhelm their enemy. Now, in order to do this, first you have to have logistics, right? To manage your own affairs, you have to have logistics to feed all of the soldiers. You have to have logistics to do the weaponry. You have to do the logistics to clothe them. You have to keep your supply lines open. All of these things are examples of Africans managing their own affairs. I can mention Jehuti Mes, whose tomb I went into, and so many others. But again, your listener, he doesn't know any of this. So if he's saying the black man managing their own affairs is hypothetical, it's because he doesn't know what he's done in the past.
Appreciated.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so more messages coming in. We have one and says that thumbs up, Hayford and Dr. Obadile. Please do your best to extend the time. That is coming from Felix Hacho. This show... okay, I'm not so clear with that. Let's see what else. Yes, let me go in for this question too. According to Dr. Ben Jokanan, he rebelled against that indoctrination by indulging in self-education.
Right.
And you would agree that materials, bordering on Africanism and literature, the papyri, as he described, that is the manuscript, the documented manuscript, are a challenge. Yeah, so how does one get self-educated?
Right. Yeah, so there's something that my father used to always tell me, a quote, he would always say, never let school get in the way of your education. And basically this is to say that if you're not getting it at school and through empirical evidence, we've seen that we're not getting those things. Even if I just mention a list of 50 of the greatest human beings to walk the face of the planet who are African people, I doubt many of our listeners would know even a single one of them. So if you're not getting it in school, then you would have to find ways to get it otherwise. So there are sites out there, all African sites such as Abibitumi Kasa, it translates to Black Power language. There are over 100,000 resources on that site. So in this day and age where you have access to internet, there's no excuse for you to say, oh, well, you can't get it. At the push of a button and a quick search, you can find so much of this information. But first, you have to even know that there is information that has been kept from you. Now, for myself, I homeschool my children. So my children are getting this right from the beginning. There's an Ghanaian author, an African author, I should say, Aikwe Ama. And he has several texts that he's come out with. One is Tsahetipeng, which translates to the peasant. And it's an ancient example of literature from ancient Kemet. And he's translated the hieroglyphics, what's called Medu Neter, which is the sacred writings, into all of these various African languages. So myself and my daughter read over 600 pages, the Tree version. They also have it translated into Kikongo, into Kiswahili, into Hausa, and so forth and so on. So this information is out there. They have PDF versions. You can just with the click of a button download this. Sanhat, one of the first examples of literature in the world. You can read it in Fanti, entirely translated. And other examples, you can just go online and read, of course, get them in English.
Yes, sir. We almost, done with the show. Time is not on our side. And then we have another message coming in this show. And so quickly, we want more of lecture hour. Donzi, from where? Donzi, add your location. It's very important next time. Yeah, so finally, what are you doing to tell the children the truth? If we should take that as the truth. because one cannot teach what he does not know.
Right, exactly. So this is exactly what we're dealing with. First off, we start from our own home. So if we are saying that we should do this, we should be the example that we wish for others to follow. There's a quote from Wrath of the Ancestors in Krumbo Yeminyanya, where there is a young prince who has gone off for Western education. He comes back and he goes to a neighboring chief and says, well, how can we deal with these people? They're very recalcitrant. They don't want to learn. So the chief says there are two examples. One is to lead by example. So certain people in South Africa, they run in front of the cattle, make whistling noises, the cattle come behind. Others, they run behind and drive them. Basically, the idea is that you can lead by example. So this is what we're doing with our homeschooling. We have a homeschool collective where others are coming together to do the same.
Okay, so we should start from our various homes.
Right, and we're doing our school as well, so that will start off very soon as well.
Thank you. Let me look at these last questions and forgive me. Let me use this scenario. If you wrote a book and someone stole it or plagiarized, is that a suggestion that your brains had been stolen? What stops you from coming out again with another one full of originality?
Well, I will give a parable that Dr. Ben used to use a lot. He would say, imagine if I make a sumptuous feast and all of these foreigners come and eat it. They go back to their place, they vomit it up. And now, because of you in a famished state, they give you this vomit and you think that, oh, this is the most wonderful thing in the world. This is basically what we've had with all these plagiarized stories of Immaculate Conception, plagiarized stories of Savior, death and resurrection, judgment, and so forth. So what we end up doing is we look through this vomit that they brought back to us looking for African spices. What we can do is once we go to primary sources, we can read the original recipe to extend the metaphor. We can make our own garden and come up with something just as sumptuous as it was back in the old days. So again, there's nothing that prevents us other than one thing that I say often is those who have the will tend not to have the ability. Those who have the ability tend not to have the will. So once you know that this is available for you, you now have the ability to follow in this path and go to those primary resources.
I think I would have to agree with my listeners that we need more time to, delve into issues. 1 hour is not enough. We will talk to our manager to see what comes up, on that. Yes, so the truth is still being told. We would have to also do more to be able to get to the bottom of the truth.
Can I make one quick plug?
Okay, yeah.
African Philosophy, the Pharaonic Period by Theophile Obenga. He goes through all of these contributions throughout the Nile Valley. Also Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization by Anthony Browder. That's very accessible for those who may not have any background. So if you want to know all of the contributions we've made in the past, that will now give you the precedent to know we've done this in the past, we can do it in the future.
Okay, so thank you very much, Dr. Badele Kambon, Research Fellow at the Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana, Legon. Hope to see you another time with such an insightful contribution. We would leave you. Okay, so let's see our texters for today's edition of Lecture Hour have been Robert Kwame, Kevin Brown, Felix Donzi, Richard, and also my producers, indefatigable ones indeed, Kosi Fiagbe and Joshua Taki. Thank you all for making this show a success. My name is Hayford, but let me leave you with this tune from Bob Marley, Babylon. Let the children know the truth. Tell the children the truth. So see you next week, same time at 2 p.m. for yet another interesting show on Lecture Hour.